History 1. A long time ago, I'm talking like 8 years back, two friends and I, Mike and Dave, did something really dumb. But back then, doing dumb stuff was what we did for fun. We're not really friends with Mike anymore, but Dave and I still chat often, and we often reminisce about this story. We were 19 years old, living in New Jersey. There were lots of vacant houses in our old town, and at the top of a hilly road not far from our houses, there was an abandoned church. The locals knew about the church. It was on a closed-off road and had been abandoned for many years. I'm not sure if it's still standing or what the current state of it is since I live in Florida now. But Mike, Dave, and I, being the thrill-seeking troublemakers we were, came up with this brilliant plan of bringing a Ouija board to the church one late night. This was in October, so I guess we were doing it in honor of the spooky season. Dave had a Ouija board in his closet, so he brought it along. I drove the three of us, picking up Mike first, then Dave, and we headed straight for the church. Since the road up the hill to the church was blocked off, we had to park on the side of the road and walk from there. We followed the road up the hill to the church, using one flashlight at first to avoid drawing any attention. But once we reached the top of the hill, all three of us turned on our flashlights. The church was surrounded by woods in every direction and had a gravel parking lot next to it. The church had been broken into many times before and was covered in graffiti, so the big front door was already ajar. Two of us had to work together to pull it open because it scraped on the floor. Once inside, we naturally looked around with our flashlights to make sure no one else was in there. It was definitely creepy being in that place at night. Dave set up the Ouija board, then pulled out 3 candles from his backpack, laughing and saying it would add to the experience. He placed the candles in a triangle around the board, and once they were lit, we turned off our flashlights. The only light in the whole place was from the candles, creating a much more eerie and uncomfortable vibe. We couldn't see more than maybe 6 feet in any direction. So we began playing with the Ouija board. Dave was doing most of the talking at this point. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he definitely started with, "Is anybody there?" in the typical cliché Ouija board fashion. The planchette started to move, and we began to laugh. I knew it was one of them doing it. I feel like it's impossible to play with a Ouija board with your friends without someone jokingly moving the planchette. We went along with it, though, and whoever was moving it spelled out a few words. As this was going on, we heard a weird cracking sound come from the altar of the church. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like a big piece of wood snapping in half. It was loud and sounded like it was done by someone. We all jumped in reaction and hurried to shine our phone flashlights in the direction of the altar. There was no one there as far as we could see. I think both of them were just as freaked out as I was after that. But the place was old and falling apart, so some weird noises didn't seem that crazy. So we kept going. We all took turns asking the board questions, but the planchette stopped moving. I think the crack sound freaked all three of us out, and now we were taking it more seriously. This went on for a while until another sound from the altar area broke the silence again. Before we even had time to shine our lights over there, something landed on the Ouija board, causing all of us to jump and scream. It was a rock about the size of a golf ball. All three of us had our hands on the planchette just a second ago. There was no way any of us could have done that. We all got up and ran out of the church screaming, leaving the Ouija board and candles behind. We ran all the way down the hill and back to my car. Fearing we were being chased, we didn't stick around. I drove us all back to Mike's house, where we just sat in the car for a good half hour, talking and wondering what exactly had happened. Dave is very religious and superstitious. He was confident we had contacted a spirit of some kind. I don't really believe in any of that stuff. I believe there was someone else in the church with us, which is equally terrifying. Dave went back to the church the next day with Mike to get his Ouija board back, and to make things even stranger, the Ouija board was missing, but the candles were still in place. When they saw it was missing, they decided to leave right away. This remains the single scariest experience of my life. History 2. When I was a Cub Scout, we'd always have our meetings at a Catholic elementary school. Sometimes we met in the gym, other times in one of the adjacent rooms. I was about 8 years old when something unsettling happened. Before I get to that, let me start from the beginning. A few days earlier, I was at Mass with my mom and my brother, like we did every other week. We usually arrived late, so we'd either sit in the back or stand by the doors if there were no seats. This particular day, we sat all the way in the back corner. My mom and brother entered the pew first, and I sat on the end. During the Mass, I noticed an older man with glasses and a white mustache standing against the wall to my left, looking at me. When I glanced over, he smiled. I vividly remember his creepy, stupid face as he tried to be funny. But I wasn't a toddler. I was 8 and it felt weird and uncomfortable. I tried to look away, but I could see him looking at me every few seconds. When I looked back, he made another weird face, trying to be funny, but it just came off as strange again. My mom noticed it this time, tapped me on the shoulder, and whispered to ignore him. I believe she gave him a dirty look as well. The next time I looked, the man was gone. He had walked somewhere else. The next thing I remember from that Mass was going up for communion. When I got back to my seat, the man was back in that spot, staring at me and smiling. My mom noticed it again, and since we had taken communion, we left. On the way out, my mom said she didn't like the way that guy was looking at us, specifically me. Fast forward to when scouts came into play. Towards the end of our meetings, we'd sometimes have little contests or games. This particular day, we were having a scavenger hunt. The items we were supposed to find all tied into the theme of scouting. I remember some of the objects on the list being a first aid kit, a rope, and a flashlight. We were split into 2 teams, each with a copy of the list, and the team that found the most items would win. We split up, and the play area ranged from the gym to the cafeteria to some adjacent rooms. I was running around rooms and tiny hallways I'd never seen before, looking for any of the items on the list. I wasn't having much luck. Eventually, I found myself in a narrow hallway at the back of the cafeteria by the kitchen. In this hallway was one of those ice cream fridges filled with ice pops. I looked inside the fridge for any items on the list, but found nothing. Then, being sneaky, I decided to take an ice pop. As I did, I heard a man's voice to the right of me. I looked over and saw the man from the church a few days earlier walking towards me, smiling. He said something like, "Don't let them see you taking that." He shut the fridge door, grabbed my hand, and told me he had some better treats in the back where kids weren't allowed. I broke free from his grip and tried to walk away, scared. He grabbed my wrist tightly and said, "Shh, calm down." I yelled for help and he let go, saying, "Stop it." I ran back to the gym and told the cubmaster what had happened. Thankfully, my cubmaster was a nice, caring man, probably because he was a father himself. He told my mom about it. I told her it was the same man from the church. My cubmaster helped my mom report the man to the church. It turned out that the man worked for the church. I'm not sure what he did exactly, but he lived on the church grounds, which explained why he was there. What makes me sick is that allegations came out against the man from an altar boy's parents, claiming he had touched the boy inappropriately. It's disgusting to imagine what he was planning to do if I had followed him. I don't know if he went to prison, but I know the church cut ties with him after this incident. History 3. Back in high school, I had a couple of close friends, Tony and Mike. We did quite a bit together, and when it came time to graduate, Tony had to move away to Greenville, South Carolina with his family due to his dad's job. After we graduated and he settled in with his family, Mike and I got invited to visit Tony for a weekend at his new house. Out of boredom, we decided to go hiking around the nearby forest and countryside, which had a scenic river. It was a beautiful area and felt quite peaceful, but we ended up getting lost. We decided to keep following the river, losing track of which direction was upstream or downstream, and there were no sounds of civilization around us. We quickly became concerned about finding a telephone to call Tony's mom or dad to come get us, as there was no paved road or street nearby. As we kept following the river, we came across this old church-like building made of really old red bricks, with a dirt parking lot and a dirt road leading up to it. It was heavily encroached with growth and bushes. We decided to go inside and see if there were people, hoping to use their telephone and get the address for our location. We noticed a few old cars, possibly from the 70s or 80s, which looked like Novas. They were very dirty and rusted, with flat or missing tires, all white-colored or used to be, and parked in a row side by side. As we got closer, We heard gospel music and some singing inside the church. Relieved that there were people, we went into the church, which appeared to be rather old and dilapidated. We peeked past the main doors to the hall and saw what I estimated was a couple dozen people, dressed as nicely as they could, though they clearly were poor. When we went inside, the old white-haired woman wearing horn-rimmed glasses who was playing the church piano stopped playing and looked at us with no expression on her face. What happened next really stuck with me, and I will never forget it as long as I live. Everyone in that church stopped singing, put down their song sheets, and slowly turned their heads to look at us with the most vacant and unwelcoming glares. Tony said, "We're sorry to interrupt. We just want to use your phone to call my folks to come get us." Nobody spoke. It was dead silent in that church, other than the wooden pews creaking from the weight of the people in them. So, we just slowly backed out of the door, let it close behind us, and looked at each other with an ominous fear. We quietly left. We started walking up that dirt road, and when Mike mentioned that there were no crosses or anything Christian in there, we looked back up the road to see that maybe a dozen of those people, all men, had walked out in front of the church and were standing there watching us intently. This freaked us out, and we began to sprint up that dirt road for what felt like a good half hour. We finally came to a very old, broken-down gas station that looked like one of those old full-service stations. We went inside to find that the shelves were mostly empty and dusty from a quick glance. An old, overly tanned, swarthy man with a really oily and dirty baseball cap was behind the counter, reading an old book with ragged edges and yellowed pages. He looked up and said, "You boys lost, huh? Just head out the way you came in, make a left, and follow that road till you see a telephone pole. Then go right at the pole down the trail, and it'll take you to a highway." We thanked the man and left quickly. As we walked down the road to the telephone pole the man had told us about, we looked back and saw the old man standing in front of the gas station with his arms folded, just staring at us with a rotten-toothed grin on his face. We got to the pole, made the right, and followed that trail to the nearest highway after about a good half hour of walking in the twilight. It had just gotten dark when we reached the highway, and we tried to wave down a few people passing by, but nobody stopped. Thankfully, a police officer saw us and pulled over to help. We told him we were lost and gave him Tony's address, to which he whistled and said we really were lost. It took about 30 minutes for that officer to drive us back to Tony's, and during the chit-chat, he told us we needed to be careful out in those woods, as there were some crazy witch folks in it. History 4. This happened in Jefferson County, Alabama, a very rural inland part of the state. I was with my girlfriend Jenna, and we were driving around, checking out the area, seeing if it was somewhere we'd like to live. It was very quiet and spacious, just what we wanted. We're both Roman Catholic, though she likes going to church more than I do. It was a weekday, middle of the day, and there wasn't much traffic at all. We checked out a bunch of important places in the area before deciding if we should move there. Jenna has been an equestrian most of her life, so a big reason for moving to a rural area was for her to have a barn for her horses. After looking at some properties listed for sale, we passed by a small, cute-looking church on a quiet road with a bunch of cars in the parking lot. This church wasn't far from the last property we checked out, so Jenna shook my shoulder and suggested we see if a mass was going on and check if it was nice. I pulled into the little dirt parking lot and parked next to an old red minivan. Most of the cars in the lot were on the older side, actually. I mentioned this to Jenna as we got out, and she agreed, saying it was probably a lower-income area. I opened the church door for us, and we stepped inside. It was small, as we expected, with 5 rows of pews cut in half by the center aisle. There had to be at least 20 people inside, but they weren't an older crowd. Usually, in every mass, big or small, you'd see a decent amount of seniors, but based on the backs of everyone's heads, they seemed to be in their 30s to 40s. Everyone was sitting in silence, seemingly in prayer, as we sat in the back. As we settled in, the people closest to us started looking at us, one at a time. As others noticed the staring, they turned to see what was happening, and then looked at us. Jenna and I glanced at each other nervously, then back at everyone else. All we could think to do was smile, but no one smiled back. They gave us the most unwelcoming stares. I then realized that none of these people were dressed even remotely nicely for a mass. What was going on here? That's when I noticed there were no women, not a single one besides Jenna, and the stares seemed more directed at her than at me. A man in a mask at the front, by what I guessed was supposed to be the altar, stepped up, pointed at us and asked, "VD&J, who invited you here?" "DJ KJ. I took it upon myself to answer and said that we were just passing by, saw a mass, and wanted to join. The man was clearly not a priest, and this was clearly not a Roman Catholic church. The masked man then said, "VD&J, you need to leave now. DJ KJ. By now, every last person in the church was staring at us. I said, "VD&J, come on, honey. DJ KJ. And we hurried out to the car. We wasted no time. I got us out of that parking lot right away. But we both noticed in the rearview mirror someone from the building getting into their van. I felt there was no way they'd follow us until we saw that gray van catching up in the mirror. I had Jenna GPS the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, and we drove straight there. The van followed us the whole way, not too close, but enough to be obvious. The second we pulled into the public safety parking lot, the van kept driving. When it was gone, we drove straight home and never looked at Jefferson County again. We had clearly ended up in some kind of cult meeting, but I don't get why they had someone follow us, or why they were having their meeting in broad daylight, or why they didn't at least lock the door.